Hello, welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. Today's date is the 30th of October 2014. Hello to everyone, thanks for listening as always. I'm still here in Odessa, Ukraine, but maybe on the move to Thailand in a couple of weeks, maybe next month. This is episode 30, so if there's any you've missed in the past, go check them out. Previous episode was Sean Stone, son of Oliver Stone, and before that was Sheila Zelinsky, I believe. Quick appeal for sharing. Share this video with as many people as you can. Put it on your Facebook page. Post it anyway where you think people are going to be able to listen to it. Let's try and get as many people listening as possible. You can download onto your own sites. Tweet it on Twitter. I thought I'd start off today by telling you what's coming up on today's show. We're going to have a quick look at the mainstream news, see what they're saying. You know, we don't accept necessarily what they're saying is true, but it's good to have a quick flick through, see what they're up to as well. We're going to look at the main headlines, and then we're going to talk to Julia Tourianski, Russian anarchist, to get a quick overview of anarchy as an alternative system of society. After that, we'll be talking to Anthony, our resident researcher, and we'll be looking at nuclear power, nuclear meltdowns, accidents, focusing on massive potential risks of nuclear energy and where those risks lie at the moment. Something that the mainstream do avoid, as I think big business make it in their interest to keep stuff like that quiet because there's a lot of money involved. Later on, after that, we'll wind down the episode. Just a reminder that we now have some offshoot shorter bonus shows called Sentinel Debates and Sentinel Chats, which you can find on the Truth Sentinel channel. Remember, there's two channels, Truth Sentinel 1, Truth Sentinel 2. Try to subscribe to both if you can. I've been uploading episodes mainly directly onto Truth Sentinel 1, as there were restrictions on Truth Sentinel 2, although those have now been lifted, so I'll occasionally put them on the other one where there's actually a lot more subscribers on Truth Sentinel 2. Try to subscribe to both if you can. Anyway, today's news. So Ukraine seems to have slipped out of the news, as I mentioned last week. I'm here in Odessa, Ukraine, fair distance away from the east where there's still troubles going on there. Recent elections in Ukraine with Western-backed leaders winning. I think because of that, I think it's unlikely you've heard the last of the Ukraine situation, because Putin's not going to be happy now that you basically got a Western-backed leadership in Ukraine. Here in Ukraine, speaking to a lot of people around, the biggest problem is the economy, rising prices and lack of work. A lot of people out of work, people finishing university, and there's just no jobs. And even if they do get a job, they get about, the kind of salary they'll be looking at is about £100 a month or a couple of $100 a month, and that's not enough to live on, you know, especially if they haven't got somewhere to live. It costs that just to rent an apartment, and that's outside of the centre, so you've got transport as well. So there's going to be big economic problems for people living here. There also seems to be a lot of multiple reports of Russian aircraft and submarines being spotted everywhere all over Europe. That could just be propaganda, could be made up by Western media. Also in the news, a Libyan man is going to sue the UK government over claims he was illegally sent back to Libya and tortured. Court of Appeal has ruled. Abdul Hakim Belhaj alleges that former Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and MI6 were complicit in arranging his and his wife's rendition from China in 2004. So yeah, a lot of governments, including the UK, have been outsourcing torture to other countries because they don't want to admit that they're involved in it. Anyway, at least some courts are recognising that these situations need to be dealt with. Some articles I've noticed on the BBC this week, which I've tweeted, include how Kate Middleton is glad to be out of the house. Yet there was a whole article basically on the fact that she left the house and said to someone, "I'm glad to be out of the house." That wasn't what the whole article was about. More kind of propaganda from the BBC, constantly writing about every movement of the royals as if we really want to hear about it, and always in a positive light. I mean, there's a lot of people who don't own a house, and so where some people are not so glad to be out of the house, they don't really have a lot of choice, as they don't have a house to go into in the first place. Also, more confusing articles on BBC as how milk may not be good for your bones. Yeah, we've been told for many years milk is good for your bones and your teeth. Well, yeah, typically the BBC like to keep producing articles which are the opposite to articles they produced previously. So you just sit there scratching your head wondering whether to drink milk or not. There was another article marvelling at royal clothes through the centuries and basically how amazing they are and how expensive and lavish they are. And of course, for most people, they can't afford to buy clothes, and these people can afford to buy enough clothes so they can never have to wear the same clothes twice, or at least not to be seen in public twice with the same clothes. It's really incredible how they can just publish these articles. And they are lapped up by the public as well, by a lot of members of the public. And they don't just sit there for a second and just think, actually, I'm paying for all this. These people are getting, have got a ridiculous amount of money, and it's just not necessary in this day and age. There was backing for a member of parliament who linked Leon Britton to sex claims in the Commons. He actually alleged publicly, and colleagues have defended Jim Hood over comments saying that he was right to speak out against Leon Britton, who lost the paedophile file. There was a paedophile file alleging there was lots of MPs in Parliament who were involved in paedophilia through the years, and Leon Britton allegedly may have been one of them, and he so conveniently lost the file, which is why there's an investigation. Although this investigation is not a proper investigation, they're not going to speak to the victims, they're not going to investigate it properly, and they're going to get someone like Fiona Woolf, who's obviously part of the establishment, although she denies it, possibly even has links to the Freemasons. They're going to get her to investigate it. It's a waste of time, you know. Let's have a proper investigation. Other MPs accused Jim Hood of slander and disgraceful behaviour, and that's all too common, reacting as though it can't possibly be true what he's saying when it likely is true. And we saw that with Cliff Richard as well, when the select committee saying he should be apologised to. The way they ransacked his house and raided his home, quite terrible, and we should definitely apologise before they've actually finished the investigation. It's just a way of sort of already saying, oh, he's not guilty, when actually there's a lot of people who've made accusations against him, and victims who say that he used to go to the Elms guest house. So the investigation needs to finish before you make the apology, not make the apology first before the investigation's finished. Seems like they've already decided otherwise, doesn't it? Okay, a place called Burkina Faso Parliament has been set ablaze. Protesters angry at plans to allow President Blaise Compaoré to extend his 27-year rule. That's in West Africa, by the way, in case you wonder where it was, because I did as well. Rising amount of protests around the world. There was one the other day in Hungary. The Hungarians were marching regarding the government's plans to tax the internet. They'll tax anything if they can. It won't be long before they tax the air you breathe. A spokesman for Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas has described the closure of the Jerusalem holy site as a declaration of war. This was after the shooting of a rabbi there. And I believe that's Temple Mount, a place that will feature, if you are a believer of Bible prophecy, that's going to be features in Revelations, and it's likely to feature in end times. And we talked about that with we talked about end times anyway with Sheila Zelinsky in a previous episode. After a 2-year suspension in issuing nuclear power plant licenses, Obama has recently, via the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, has granted long-term licensing renewals for 2 nuclear power stations near Philadelphia. And apparently this is being done for political and fundraising reasons, as most things are these days. And we're going to be talking about nuclear power stations and the threat they pose to us later on. Also, on the same subject as nuclear power and nuclear weapons and nuclear accidents and nuclear disasters, new details have recently emerged that in 1982 a secret Home Office exercise tested the UK's capacity to rebuild after a massive nuclear attack. And so files have basically recently been released at the National Archives. And it was interesting because in their plans of how they would react after a nuclear attack, it seems the people they would turn to were psychopaths. These are these words. Basically, they were looking at a scenario of 300 megatons of nuclear bombs being detonated over Britain. These are all in documents, by the way. It's not a conspiracy. And they were looking at the scenario where many cities had been flattened, millions of people dead. And obviously there would be survivors and people suffering radiation sickness, and they wanted to think about how they would deal with it, how would they restore order and begin to rebuild. So Jane Hogg, a scientific officer in the Home Office, said that police would be busy helping inadequate people in disaster-struck areas, and suggested that another group of people could be recruited to help keep order. So which kind of group of people was she talking about? So these are her recommendations. It is generally accepted that around 1% of the population are psychopaths. These are the people who could be expected to show no psychological effects in the communities which have suffered the severest losses. And she suggested that these psychopaths would be very good in crisis. They would have no feelings for others, no moral code, and they would be quite intelligent and logical. So, I mean, I think probably a lot of these people are already working in government, so they would presumably still be okay in their bunkers. So anyway, we're going to be looking at the nuclear power threat today, and we'll go over to Anthony later for that. First of all, let's check if we've got any voicemails.
It's Neil. Thanks for your show. Listen to it most weeks. And I just had a question about Bitcoin. Thinking of making an investment. And do you think it's going to be the currency of the future? Electronic currency? And do you think it's worth the investment? Do you think regulation's a good thing? Thanks for taking my question. Goodbye.
Nice to hear from Neil. Thanks for calling in with that. I'll try and remember to ask Julia about Bitcoin, although we're going to be a bit pushed for time to talk too much in depth about it. We'll talk about more about Bitcoin in another episode, though. Just a quick roundup of last episodes. Last episode we spoke to Sean Stone. Today we're going to have a quick chat about Anarchy with Julia Tourianski, who some people may have seen on Alex Jones. She's a Russian anarchist now living in Canada, who makes videos about political issues such as anarchy, abortion, feminism, Bitcoin. Her videos are on her channel Brave the World on YouTube. Check it out. If you go to her channel, you'll see that she says things like, I'm in a love affair with freedom. She says she's in the business of anti-politics and a promoter of anti-state mentality, which I completely agree with. We're going to talk about all of these issues, but we had limited time today, so we're just going to talk about Anarchy today. I'm sure we'll chat again at some point, though. Before we go to the interview, let's have a quick look at what Anarchy is. Anarchy arises from the ancient Greek an, meaning without, and archos, meaning leader. Anarchism is generally defined as the political philosophy which holds the state to be immoral and corrupt, which some of you may agree with that at the moment. So if you view our current government as immoral and corrupt, you're at least one step along to being an anarchist. Contrary to belief, anarchy is synonymous with disorder. Anarchists generally advocate non-hierarchical, horizontal organization, but it's not always considered chaos, though it can be if you wish. It just means there's no government to enforce its will upon you, so people organize themselves and are in control of their own destinies, basically. Pierre-Joseph Proudhon adopted the term in his 1840 treatise, What is Property?, to refer to a new political philosophy, anarchism. Stateless societies based on voluntary associations. So you can still have things like roads which can be built, shops can still run, businesses can still be started, and you can still have organisation. The difference is there's no government involvement. Small localised groups can form and can cooperate to ensure the needs of a community are met. Anarchist school of thoughts can differ quite differently. There's lots of different types, supporting anything from extreme individualism to complete collectivism. And most anarchists oppose all forms of aggression, so it's not quite the chaotic, every man for himself, everyone trying to kill each other kind of theory that some people might have in their minds when they think of anarchy. I mean, anarchists, oppose aggression, supporting self-defense and supporting non-violence. Basically, law and freedom without force. I mean, like any system, there's going to be problems and there's going to be dangers. So, with anarchy, as with all systems, an example with anarchy of some problems might be that gangs could form. And in fact, this did happen in Albania when they experienced a period of anarchy in 1997, apparently. But anarchism is self-organisation created by consent and mutual association without coercion. It's not supposed to be mob rule. So if it becomes that, it's not really anarchy anymore. At the moment, we have a kind of mob rule, if anything. I mean, elections control modern day gangs at the moment by giving them money, which they spend mostly on adverts, to brainwash a willing public. I mean, look at the midterm elections in the States. I mean, I'm actually amazed that anyone who watches a political advert believes any of it and pays any attention to it whatsoever. It's 99.9% lies. Look at Obama and what he's said before. And the 0.1% that isn't lies is the negative bit in the advert where they actually said something true, like the country's in a mess or something like that. Even if you don't like the sound of anarchy, it may come anyway due to catastrophic events such as nuclear meltdown, so it's probably good to have a look at. It could be the Ebola pandemic or something else. I think it would be good if we could opt out of government systems, be left alone and form societies of our own with different ideas and values. And you could go and join the society that suits you better. So rather than voting for what you'd like a system to be, you join the system that most suits you, or you set up one that has all the priorities that you enjoy in your own society. Anyway, we'll be talking about utopian societies, possibly next episode or in an episode coming very soon. Anyway, let's go to Julia Tourianski.
Привет, Julia. Очень приятно. Как дела?
Спасибо. Все хорошо.
Good. Welcome to Truth Sentinel.
Thank you for having me.
I saw one of your videos on Brave the World on YouTube. Can you just tell me, what's the feedback loop?
The feedback loop, well, that's a very long conversation. I guess it's just the concept that, the way I describe the concept of all of our energy and the way that we live being kind of cycled back around on us and not causing any change.
Okay, fine. We're going to talk about anarchy a little bit. Something I've been looking into recently. I mean, a lot of people are totally dissatisfied with our current system, and people are looking for a new system. And I mean, everyone knows that anarchy has always been associated with chaos, and looking into it, it seems it's not actually chaos. If you could also sum up anarchy in a nutshell, what's anarchy for you?
For me, it is chaos. But the word chaos for me has good connotations. I think the best things come out of chaos, and chaos. I guess I think of that term not in a non-violent way. I think of it in maybe a creative way. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah, no, a bit. Yeah, I mean, it is true that people do think of chaos in a negative way, but actually some of the best things come out of chaos. Some of the best artwork comes out of chaos,
Yeah, it's, if you keep your dog on a leash its whole life, it's not going to experience anything, right? So take it off the leash. That's chaos.
Well, you never met my previous dog that I had, because if you took him off the leash, there was always trouble. But that's another story. He had a problem with other animals, basically.
At least you have a story. That's my point, right?
Well, there was a time when I was on roller skates, and I was actually holding on to the lead with my dog, and that was quite painful, actually, because I hit a brick wall as he tried to chase after a cat. But,
so there you go. Don't put him on the leash, then.
That's true. But then another time I took him off the leash, and he killed next door neighbour's cat, so I don't know.
So there you go. You got to train the dog instead of shortcutting to a leash.
I did try and train him, but didn't have much luck there. I wanted to ask you about Anarchy anyway. Do you think there's a realistic chance that it will ever be adopted internationally, or is that not the point? Could it be adopted perhaps by a group that wish to opt out of the current system?
Well, you don't really adopt anarchy. It's just something that's, I guess, regressive in nature. So you just get rid of everything else, and then you're left with living.
True, yeah, but like if someone actually wanted to live an anarchic lifestyle, we have this government over the looking over us who are going to try and come and get you and stop you from doing that. So how do you deal with that?
Well, that's the big question, right? That's the big problem. How do we preserve these apparent rights that we're supposed to be born with, but in reality they seem to be given to us by these nation states, and they can very easily take them away. So how do we reconcile that? How do we get away?
I mean, I'm fairly new to the concept of anarchy. I've just been looking into it recently, and I wanted to ask you a few questions about it. And I don't expect you to know all the answers. I mean, it's not an organised concept anyway, really. But just to give a bit of a background for listeners, would you say there's any laws in anarchy at all?
Yeah, there's rules in some way, you know. You have the non-aggression principle, which everything basically stems from that. So you have self-defense, but you can't enact violence against somebody unless they've, started the violence initially against you. So that's a rule, and everything kind of stems from that. And you have property rights from that as well. Nobody can aggress against your property. So that's basically all we need.
And do you think, talking about needs, is there a need for a police force or not?
Well, we would have private police force. So we would pay for the police force, right? So with that, people worry about natural monopolistic cartels rising up, but that's a worry for sure. But I mean, look at what we have today, so I wouldn't mind trying something else.
You know what, I'd like to try something else as well. What about borders, passports, that kind of thing?
No, no, nothing like that. I don't think you'd even have to have a registered identity.
But if you don't have borders between countries, I mean, think of the United States. A lot of people there are very patriotic. I mean, if you compare it to the UK, I'd say people aren't that patriotic in the UK, but people in the States really are very patriotic. So if you take away borders, I mean, if you think of someone like Alex Jones, and I saw you on the Alex Jones show, and he always talks about, how Mexicans are coming across the borders and stuff like that. So if you took away borders, well,
state, right? So you can't think of anarchy as, oh well, like you're thinking of it in deep, like within our current systems, right? It has to be all or nothing. So yeah, you can't just you can't apply one anarchistic principle to our current situation and expect something good to come out of it, because it won't. So actually, Alex isn't for borders, but he is when there's a welfare state. So if they didn't have the socialistic healthcare system and a welfare system that supports, illegal immigration and the underclass, then it wouldn't matter, right? Because nobody would bother to go there. But because they do have that, then all the people go there to take advantage of the system, and it eventually collapses everything. So you have to look at it in context.
Yeah, fair enough. One problem, I think, with not just with anarchy, but with any system, I think, is prisons. And I've sat down and thought a bit about prisons and how you deal with criminals. And it's a real difficult problem to solve. I mean, is there any solution in the anarchic system to what you do with people who are dangerous to society?
Most of the people that I've talked to or what I've read kind of goes on the principle of if you commit some horrific crime, you're ostracized from the community and you can get out, basically. I'm sure there is some sort of private anarchistic prison concept. I mean, the thing with this non-system is there's so many options, as long as that they're not enforced by an overruling structure that like a government. As long as it's completely voluntary, then that's anarchy. You can work within kind of those concepts. So like, there isn't one answer what I'm trying to say. So I don't really know. I mean, as long as it's voluntary and people aren't being forced to participate in something, then it's still anarchy. With prisons, yeah, I'm not sure, because we have private prison systems right now, and I don't know if they're that bad because of governments or if they'd be that bad on their own. I don't really like to have a financial incentive to keep people locked up. I think that's very risky. So I would kind of vouch for a more, to ostracize people out of the community that commit crimes.
And have you seen any examples of people putting anarchy into practice in any sort of smaller communities or anything like that?
Well, there's anarchy all over, all throughout history. I mean, the Wild West was anarchy, and there's a huge misconception about the Wild West. There was like one major shootout ever, and they mourned the death of like the 5 people that died for years to come. So it was actually a very peaceful time, and there wasn't this whole like culture of bank robbing, villains on horseback. It just didn't exist. It's just been, Hollywood ruins history most of the time. So that's one example. But I mean, I always say that without anarchy, like, everybody in Russia would have starved and died, because if people in Russia actually adhere to the rules of the socialistic regime, the communism that they were, subjected to, everybody would have starved and died, because it was such a shitty system. But there were very rich black markets that functioned with, like, under the skin of the socialist beast, right? So they survived. People survived and led much more decent lives than they would have if they actually adhered to what socialism presented to them. So it's the way people survive already today.
Okay, I saw a video on YouTube, Larkin Rose, and it was a video on what anarchy isn't, and I found it quite useful. It gave quite a nice little overview of anarchy. Who are the best people to check out if people want to find out and get a bit of a background about what anarchy is or isn't?
I would do reading. I like a lot of the French philosophers. I like Anselm Belgarrigue. He's great. He wrote a paper called Anarchy is Order. That's a great one. I like Jeffrey Tucker too. He's cool. He breaks things down pretty well.
Can Jeffrey Tucker does he do any videos as well, or is it just reading?
Yeah, he does videos.
Another thing I've heard you talk about is Bitcoin. Would you say that's an anarchic form of currency?
Yeah, originally the cypherpunk movement is pretty anarchistic in my mind, but it's becoming less so. It's becoming, it's got the anarchist system fitting into a libertarian model and trying to function within like a corporatist reality. So, yeah, Bitcoin's letting me down slowly, but we'll see what happens.
It's letting you down? What? How do you mean?
Yeah, that's going to be a whole long conversation. We don't have time right now.
Okay, yeah. I've heard there's other coins as well as Bitcoins, like dark coins and stuff like that. Are they going to take over Bitcoin, do you think?
No, they're not. And dark coin I don't even like, because it had centralized nodes, and the source code was only released recently, I think. I'm not really sure. It's not the altcoin. It's about Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't work out or becomes what I'm fearing that it becomes, then the altcoins will just follow suit. I'm being very negative right now, but hopefully, I don't know, hopefully there'll be some breakthrough coin that actually does what we wanted it to do, but I don't know, I think the battle is won and lost with Bitcoin.
One of my listeners has asked, should he buy some Bitcoins? What would your advice be? I know you're not a financial advisor, but would you say hold off at the moment then?
There's no point to hold off. The more you hold off, I think the higher the price will rise. Like right now, it's decently low. I don't know, it might fall lower. I would buy right now. I mean, I still believe in it. I still personally have invested in it, and I'm not gonna advise them, but like, I would. Yeah, I really would.
We haven't got too much time today, although I'm sure me and you are going to chat again at some point. But I wanted just to talk a little bit about happiness and positive thinking, because I know you have touched on it in your videos, and we've been having a bit of debate on positive thinking on this show. we're living in times when a lot of people feel despair, and people in general aren't happy and quite dissatisfied with life, I think.
Yeah.
Isn't it good to try and combat that by finding something positive to focus on, or would you suggest something different? What's your views on finding happiness?
Well, it depends. Like, what are you focusing on that's positive? Is it something that's medicative, or is it real, right? So, like, I don't know, like, it's one thing to occupy yourself so you don't think about whether you're happy or not, and it's another thing to actually find peace. So, and I don't think that's even the point. Like, you can find peace in your deathbed when you're 70. Like, I'm not looking for that, and I don't think people should be looking for that. I think people should embrace the struggle and should embrace their highs and lows, and it's okay to be miserable sometimes, or often. Like, being happy all the time is, I think, detrimental to society. I think there's a wider range of emotion that we can subscribe to and fuel productivity from. And
if you're not looking for happiness, what would you say you are looking for? Is there anything that Julia Tourianski is looking for in particular in life at the moment?
I'm not looking for anything. I'm looking forward to certain things, though. I'm looking forward to a lot of certain things, and I'm working hard to pass the time until those things arrive, and hopefully they'll arrive in different forms than I expect them to, because that's more fun.
I wanted to say, I really like your videos. You've got quite a poetic style about, some of the things you talk.
Try.
What are you working on at the moment, and where can people actually see your videos?
They can see at bravetheworld.com or on my YouTube channel, Brave the World channel, and you can follow me on Twitter at Brave the World. I have a lot of projects on the go. Right now I'm working with somebody on a very creative project. I'm doing the shadow writer, so you might not, I don't know, if you listen closely you'll see that it's me, but I'm not going to be too public about it. And yeah, I don't know. I will be doing I guess if you want something specific, I will be doing a abortion video in time for the Roe versus Wade anniversary in January. I'll be doing that for sure.
That's great. I read your abortion essay, which I think is just really, really good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wrote that like 2 years ago, so I think a video is past due, right?
I just think it's a really well-reasoned chat about the abortion issue, because it's a difficult issue, and I think you're really fair with it, to be fair. And we don't have a lot of time today, but I really hope you can come back and we'll talk about feminism, abortion, and a lot of stuff in more detail. But I really want to thank you for just taking a little bit of time and coming chatting to us today, and we'll definitely have a chat again at some point. Okay?
Yeah, for sure. You caught me in some chaos. Take care.
Oh yeah, Julia. Have a great day, and we'll speak to you again soon. Okay?
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Thanks to Julia. Let me know what you think of Anarchy. Remember to use our voicemail system. Find it on Truth Sentinel YouTube channel. You can go to the About section, or if you go to the top right, there's a little orange icon there as well. We'll be doing an episode on Utopia, as I mentioned, so look out for that coming soon. The voicemail, by the way, is at truthsentinel9.blogspot.co.uk. Quick thank you to Seth Davis for helping provide guests, much appreciated. And a reminder again, we've got new shorter Sentinel debates and Sentinel chats. Find that on our website, on our YouTube channel. Military suicides is today's topic, so go and have a look at that. As mentioned, we're going to talk about the nuclear threat that exists, and this comes as today an investigation has been launched after France's state-owned EDF power company said unidentified drones had flown over 7 of its nuclear plants. And the first drone was spotted on the 5th of October, and there had been further sightings up to the 20th of October. Who is behind the drones is unclear, they say. Greenpeace has denied any involvement. Could it be terrorists? Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve says measures are being taken to neutralise the drones. Hopefully that means blow them out of the sky. these drones do pose a security threat, as nuclear reactors could be a terrorist target. And we know this because terrorists have actually said that. They plan to attack a nuclear power plant. There's an article in the Telegraph in July of this year, specifically in France as well. French police stumbled on the plans for terrorists to attack a nuclear power station, and they decoded messages between a 29-year-old Algerian butcher living in the Vaucluse area of southern France. He was known as Ali M, and one of the highest ranking members in Al-Qaeda. Do you remember Al-Qaeda? Yeah, before ISIS came along? Seems like everyone's forgotten about them. The media certainly have. Funny how we don't hear about them anymore, isn't it? It's almost as if the media and the government, they basically just control the media and focus on whatever they want to focus on in order to bring about their policies. Because although Al-Qaeda were not the force they once were, it seems like they've disappeared this year and just been completely replaced with ISIS. No mention of them almost at all anymore. And they're not the same group, they're not the same people. They had a falling out and they have completely different leaders. Al-Qaeda's leadership even communicated that they have no allegiance to ISIS as well. Anyway, so the fact that there's drones flying over a nuclear power station and no one knows whose drones they are is a major security breach. We're going to talk today about how dangerous these nuclear reactors can be. We're going to look at Fukushima, Chernobyl, past accidents, and look at potential possibilities for future accidents. And it's almost 100% certain there is going to be future accidents or deliberate terrorist events involving nuclear reactors. And maybe they're going to be the kind of things that make Fukushima and Chernobyl look very minor in comparison. Let's just have a quick listen to some clips regarding Fukushima, Chernobyl, and some previous accidents.
An accident in the water cooling system at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, forced the company to call a general emergency and shut down part of the plant for an unspecified period.
It roared with a tremendous roar of releasing steam. It woke me up, and I looked out the window and I saw this huge column going up in the air and roaring.
Everything is under control. There is and was no danger to public health and safety. There was a small release of radiation to the environment. All safety equipment functioned properly. Metropolitan Edison has been monitoring the air in the vicinity of the plant constantly since the incident. No increase in normal radiation levels has been detected. The situation is more complex than the company first led us to believe. We are taking more tests, and at this point we believe there is still no danger to the public health. Metropolitan Edison has given you and us conflicting information.
The new information is this. The accident sent ionized radiation beaming through the plant's 4-foot-thick walls. Consequently, the metal shield that protects the nuclear fuel...
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged, and there is speculation in Moscow that people were injured and may have died. The Soviets may have been fairly quick to acknowledge the accident because evidence in the form of mild nuclear radiation had already reached beyond the Soviet borders to Scandinavia. We begin with ABC's Dean Reynolds.
The first word that something was seriously wrong came from this power plant in eastern Sweden, where workers coming on the job registered abnormally high levels of radiation on their bodies. Although the levels were not high enough to harm humans and no accident had occurred at that plant, it was shut down. And as tests were conducted, similar puzzling reports of high radiation came in from all over Scandinavia. But still, no accidents were reported, leading to the conclusion that the problem was elsewhere, to the east, in the Soviet Union, a fact confirmed to the Soviet people on television tonight.
От Совета министров СССР.
An official announcement from the Council of Ministers. There has been an accident at the Chernobyl atomic power station. One of the atomic reactors was damaged. The consequences of the accident are being taken care of. Help is being given to the victims of the accident. A government commission has been set up.
The civilian plant in question is in the Ukraine. It's something of a showcase facility, featured here in Soviet Life magazine, which extolled its safety record. It's near the city of Kiev, population 2.5 million, and about 1,000 miles from Scandinavia, meaning that whatever did occur there, a radioactive cloud headed north across Poland today and into Denmark, where radiation levels were 5 times normal, to Finland 6 times normal, to Norway up 50%, and Sweden illegally high.
It's almost certainly the most severe accident that has ever taken place in the short history of civilian nuclear power.
That means it is far worse than the 3 Mile Island incident of 1979.
As of 11:01, at the number 3 reactor in the number 1 nuclear power plant in Fukushima Prefecture, there was a loud sound and white smoke billowed out, and there is a possibility that hydrogen explosion took place. And this was announced by the Tokyo Electric Power Company. In terms of parameter, there is, they believe that the container vessel is not damaged. However, with regards to the radiation that might have leaked, they are now checking, and they have confirmed that some workers have been injured, and they have called ambulance. And in coordination with related agencies, the company says that it will try to secure safety and will continue monitoring the situation. That was the report by the company. Now, in addition to that, what we would like to say is that that we accepted such report from the company, and currently the wind, actually on the ground it is almost windless, but on the air above, the wind is blowing to the southwest. And also for the residents who still remain in the 20 kilometers radius, we ask them to remain indoors, close the windows, and try not to be exposed to the air.
Do they have control of the situation at the site?
No. It's still a ticking time bomb. Realize that after the big Sumatra tsunami, 90 days after, 3 months after that, there was a huge aftershock. If they have another aftershock, and they're not in cold shutdown yet till next year, the accident could start all over again. It's like hanging by your fingernails. Yeah, it's stable, but you're hanging by your fingernails.
Americans think this crisis is over, or that some even think that maybe it's solved or it's contained. It's not. What's happening right now?
In the last 2 weeks, everything we knew about that accident has been turned upside down. We were told 3 partial meltdowns, don't worry about it. Now we know it was 100% core melt in all 3 reactors. Radiation, minimal, that was released. Now we know it was comparable to the radiation at Chernobyl. And as far as evacuation, yeah, 12 miles, that's it. You don't have to evacuate beyond 12 miles. Now they find hotspots, 4 hotspots outside the evacuation zone. 34,000 school children now have radiation badges when they go to school.
Kindergartners with radiation badges.
Down to 4 years of age. Can you imagine that? Kindergarten kids with radiation badges going to school. So all the mythology of the accident has been turned upside down because utility has finally fessed up to how severe this accident really was.
In your view, did they not know how bad it was, or they knew and they didn't tell, or they just were completely blown away by the scope of the disaster?
I'm a physicist, and we tried to reconstruct the accident in our computers given the feeble amount of information they gave us. We knew it was much more severe than they were saying because radiation was coming out left and right. So, in other words, they lied to us.
Merhaba, Anthony.
Merhaba, Scott Nasselson. That means, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good.
Yeah, that's hello in Turkish, isn't it? Merhaba.
Merhaba. Yes.
Okay, so how are things with you?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm enjoying Kayseri. I really am. It's been a nice week this week. Been exploring the city a little bit, and things have settled down politically and in terms of demonstrations and so on. Things are a lot calmer, and so yeah. I'm well. And you?
That's good. Yeah, I'm not too bad myself. I've joined the gym and trying to get fit at the moment. Although I am still drinking a bit of the local vodka, so I don't know if that mixes too well.
It has to be done.
It does have to be done.
Yeah, I've got one particular thing that I want to talk about in some detail, if we have time. Something that's been disturbing me a lot for the last number of years. I wish we could talk about something a bit cheerier, but unfortunately, the world is just, continuing its slide into complete insanity, it seems to me. And we saw another step in that direction. As you know, 3 years ago there was an earthquake and a tsunami off the coast of Japan, which caused a triple meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, which is about 220 kilometers northeast of Tokyo.
Where I incidentally used to live, in Fukushima region.
Really? You lived in Fukushima?
I did indeed. I lived not far away from the Daiichi reactors. I worked in a place called British Hills, which is kind of like a fake village on top of a mountain in the Sendai area near Fukushima. Fukushima was the town we used to drive to go and get supplies. I lived near genshiryoku. So, and in fact, we used to have Daiichi school used to come and visit our sort of make-believe British village to come and have English lessons.
Well, I wouldn't be driving to Fukushima for supplies nowadays.
No, I wouldn't either.
Because this, as you know, it was a total catastrophe. I mean, it's the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl in 1986. You had 160,000 people evacuated. You had contamination of food, water supplies, the air, and so on, and on a massive scale. And really, that turns out to have been just the tip of the iceberg. It's getting worse and worse as time goes on.
Well, some people say it's far worse than we're being told as well.
Yes, and there's even been the claim that it has now surpassed Chernobyl as the worst nuclear accident of all time.
And all of that radioactive water that was being pumped into the sea, thousands of gallons a day, is heading across the Pacific Ocean towards the States.
It is, yeah, and we still don't know what the result of that will be. But at the time when the accident happened, the Japanese government was forced to make an uncharacteristically sensible decision. They ordered that all the nuclear power plants in Japan be switched off, basically. Now, this was a huge decision to make because about 30% of Japan's electricity is supplied by nuclear power. And since that shutdown, Japan has been importing fossil fuels to keep up with its needs. And that's been enormously expensive and of course, environmentally quite disastrous as well. However, what they haven't been doing in that 3-year period is increasing the risk that we really will see an apocalypse in our lifetimes. Because, to be really honest with you, Scott, if we're going to see an apocalypse, then the overwhelming chances are that it's going to start with a malfunction at a nuclear power plant.
Either that or a nuclear bomb.
Well, yes, and in both cases, the odds are that it isn't going to be somebody pressing a red button. It's going to be an accident. Now, these disasters that we've seen so far, they're extremely minor in comparison to what will happen if one of these plants blows completely. And it's only going to take one to wipe out a continent. And believe me, the chances of this happening are not small. They're in fact much greater than governments would generally like you to think. And in certain cases, we really do need to shut down these stations right now if we don't want the shit to hit the fan. Because the number of nuclear power stations around the world that have been judged as likely to produce an accident is just shockingly high. And we really don't hear enough about this. Now,
and in both cases, in the case of Chernobyl and Fukushima, we're dealing with governments that seem very reluctant to actually give out too much information as to what actually has happened. And in both cases, no one can be quite sure as to just how large the disaster was and what kind of effects it's had on people.
I agree, but I don't think it's significant to those governments, and I want to talk about that in a moment. Now, since the reactors were shut down in Japan, the government's been agitating to get them back online again. But there are two things to bear in mind here. First, there's huge public opposition to that idea. The Japanese public, or a majority of the Japanese public, do not want the nuclear reactors switched on. And secondly, presumably because of that, the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, has dumped the decision onto regional authorities. So rather than him deciding, the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, has dumped the decision onto regional authorities. So each prefecture or region has to vote separately. But of course, ultimately we know when the government's wishes and the population's wishes don't match, these enlightened democratic governments of the 21st century will find a way eventually to do whatever they want, regardless.
Or they'll find a way to manipulate the population so that they actually demand that they switch them back on.
Exactly, yeah, manufacturing consent. And that's what we've seen in Japan. Now, on Kyushu Island, there's a small city of about 160,000 people called Satsuma Sendai, and it's the site of a nuclear power plant owned by the Kyushu Electric Power Company, which has 2 reactors there. Today, the council voted to turn the reactors on again. So today has turned out to be, I would say, quite a significant day in the history of nuclear power, because it marks a point where you have at least one city rejoining this idiotic race to the apocalypse. And by the way, in the lead up to that vote, the Kyushu Electric Power Company did send representatives around to talk to the community, but people who attended the meeting said they were essentially lectures, where there was hardly any opportunity to ask questions, and the company refused to answer anyone's concerns about evacuation plans if there was a meltdown at the power plant. And we can presume, I think, that that's because its plans are hugely inadequate, because we saw that in Fukushima.
Did you also hear that one of the trade ministers in the government that would be involved in the decisions as to whether to switch on these power plants has actually been discovered that he had a bit of a conflict of interest because he had shares in the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO.
TEPCO, yeah. I did not know that, but can I just tell you that I am not in the least bit surprised.
Well, it tends to be the case with a lot of these decisions that are being made. All of these government ministers, they have interests, financial interests in a lot of these situations which kind of influence their decisions a little bit.
It certainly does. Well, I want you to remember, I want all of your listeners to remember the name Satsuma Sendai. Yeah, Satsuma as in the orange.
Satsuma, yeah, that should be easy to remember.
Because now, after today's decision, we have one more city in the world, Satsuma Sendai, that's vying to be the next Pripyat. Yeah, and you know, Scott, Pripyat, it's the city just near Chernobyl, which was evacuated.
Which we may be visiting at some point.
I really hope we can. Yeah. I'm hoping that you and I are going to record a future episode there. Mm-hmm. But that city was evacuated in 1986, and it's still abandoned now because of the incredibly high levels of radioactivity in some parts of the city. So now Satsuma Sendai is back on the list of possible future Pripyats. And I'm assuming that a lot of other Japanese cities are going to follow. So look, I think on a day like this one, it's worth having a look at the overall issue of nuclear power stations and the state they're in different parts of the world. Because I don't know if you've noticed this. Well, I think you have noticed this. When a big nuclear accident happens, the media coverage has this kind of undertone of blaming the country where it happened. You know, in the case of Ukraine, of course, it was part of the USSR in 1986, and so in the West, the coverage really played up that angle, you know, that the Soviets were masters of mismanagement and they were secretive and inefficient, and everything they said about the situation was laced with propaganda and so on. And then with Fukushima, we heard similar things. You know, the government isn't telling us the full story, it's secretive, it's la la la. So there's this kind of underlying insinuation that these accidents only happen in dysfunctional, secretive countries that are somehow uncivilized in the way they run things. You know, if you listen closely to what the media says in these situations, you can almost detect a kind of current of subtle racism in the coverage.
Maybe I would agree with you to a certain extent, but I guess you know a little bit about the culture of Ukraine, and in industry, it's common practice to accept bribes, and so, you know, if there's an inspection, then it wouldn't be completely unlikely that someone might accept a bribe to sort of say, yeah, everything's fine here, or cut corners here, save some money, so we can scrape that money off for ourselves.
Well, I think that that's true, but I think that when the media plays this up, there's a motive. So the motive is to distance these nuclear accidents from the everyday realities of Western audiences. You know, so that the people who are watching these reports on Fukushima or wherever, they just don't get too curious about what's happening in their own countries. You know? And I find that really quite evil.
It's definitely hypocritical.
It is, and in the case of Chernobyl, I also think it's bitterly ironic. I mean, in 1986, you're right about Ukrainian society. It's corrupt, it's secretive, it's all of those things. But in 1986, the year when Chernobyl happened, that was also the year of the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Now, if you had studied management in the business faculty of a university in the 1990s, you would have learned a lot about the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, because it became like the number one case study for dysfunctional management culture and secretive management culture, and the catastrophic results which can happen when management is like that. So you know, this idea that nuclear accidents can only happen in faraway places in countries that are not like us, it's ridiculous, and as you said, it's hypocritical. It can happen, and it's going to happen in countries just like ours, maybe our countries. But I think in the meantime, one important question to ask is, okay, so a lot of countries are using nuclear reactors now. Which ones are the most dangerous? Yeah. And if you ask that question, you need to look all over the globe for answers. But there are certain areas of concentration. And of course, one of those is the former USSR and Eastern Bloc countries, because we know the Soviets were very fond of their nuclear power. And now quite a few of the reactors are in very poor condition there. So probably the scariest, and I think this should be a lot more famous than it is. Probably the scariest is the Metsamor plant in Armenia. It's near the capital, Yerevan. It was built in the 70s. It was brought online in 1980. But 8 years after this plant opened, there was a 6.9 magnitude earthquake in Armenia. It was a devastating quake, lots of deaths, and its epicenter was 75 kilometers away from Metsamor. And that was not a surprise, because this is actually one of the most seismically active regions anywhere in the world. So they built this reactor on a fault line, basically. And then an earthquake happened. Everybody was surprised, and they deactivated the reactor. But that was 1988. The same year, an armed conflict started between Armenia and Azerbaijan over this disputed territory called Nagorno-Karabakh. And Scott, I know you're familiar with this. As you know, that conflict hasn't really been resolved. It's still kind of going on or simmering even now. But between 1988 and 1984, that was a full-scale conflict. And one result of it was that Armenia lost access to its energy sources in Turkey and Azerbaijan. So then there was this desperate energy shortfall in Armenia, and they had no way to make it up. So in 1995, they just switched the reactor back on. It's 35 years old. It's built on a fault line, as I said. And unlike most nuclear power stations, it doesn't have a primary containment structure. This is a kind of lead structure that's built around the reactor, and the idea is it contains the spread of radiation if there's a meltdown. Metsamor doesn't have one. They just didn't build one there. So a lot of people believe that it's the most dangerous reactor in the former USSR, or possibly in the world. Now, of course, the Armenian government knows this, and originally they planned to decommission Metsamor in 2016 or 2017. But at the moment, it's supplying about 40% of Armenia's energy. So to decommission it, something else dramatic would have to happen, and that isn't happening. So in 2012, the government announced that it's going to keep the plant running for an extra 10 years, and rather than decommission it, they're just going to renovate it. So they're going to ask the Russians in to renovate the plant, which we'll see in a moment. Asking the Russians to help you with a nuclear power plant is just a disaster. But finally, when they do decommission it in 2026, Scott, what do you think they're going to put there in its place?
School playground?
Close.
What?
Another nuclear power plant.
Ah, okay.
On a fault line.
Not such a good idea.
Not such a good idea. So you've got Metsamor in Armenia. You've got Chernobyl in Romania. It's the only Romanian nuclear power plant, but it was built in 1996, and since it was built, it's been plagued by small malfunctions and problems, and every so often these problems threaten to turn into something more serious. It was built by a Canadian company, by the way, so you can't blame the Russians here. You know, Western countries also build unsafe plants.
Well, I mean, I just wanted to quickly mention there was the 3 Mile Island accident as well, the nuclear meltdown that occurred in 1979 as well. That was in Pennsylvania, United States. So
that's
it's obviously not just something that happens in other countries.
No, it isn't. And interestingly, the precise amount of radioactive material which leaked in that incident is still not known. We do not know how much.
I think that's the case with all of them, though, isn't it? I mean, we kind of have to sort of trust that it's not that bad. I don't think anyone has a clue, and I've got a feeling it's way more serious than any of us realise.
Well, it absolutely is, and you know, Fukushima, I think, is the test case of that. But I also would say that some of these plants, like the one I just mentioned, Metsamor in Armenia, we don't know how serious it is in the sense that we don't understand just how close these plants are to completely melting down. With Metsamor, it's going to happen. Well, it's going to happen, no, but it could happen literally at any moment. Another one that's really concerning is the Leningrad plant in Russia, close to St. Petersburg. It's about 70 kilometers from St. Petersburg. In fact, Russia's got a whole slew of plants that are slated for decommissioning, but they're probably going to continue to run for years past the date when they've been planned to be decommissioned, because basically you need to build a replacement. You know, energy grids depend on these things, and nothing has been done to replace them. So these plants are going to just continue running until something terrible happens, and the Leningrad plant is the worst of them. It's been around for decades, and in 1975 there was a serious meltdown there, or partial meltdown. If that hadn't been contained, this plant could actually be a more famous plant than Chernobyl right now. There was a radioactive gas leak there in 1992. There was an explosion in 2005 that killed one worker. In 2009 there was another accident at the plant, and after the accident there were rumors of a coolant leak which could be highly deadly. But of course, with all of these accidents, the authorities have denied they're serious, and we're probably never going to find out. But this is also another plant in a densely populated area that seems like anything could happen there at any time.
I wanted to also mention that occasionally I'm sure there's accidents that go unreported. I know that a friend of mine in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine, she reported that in a smaller city that I cannot remember and wouldn't be able to pronounce anyway, there was a nuclear power station there, and one day some sirens went off, and everyone was told to go indoors, and something had happened, and something had apparently infected the air and was spreading over the city, and then later on they were told, oh well, you know, you can come out now. And these kind of things, it's like they don't hit the media, but you know, how serious was that incident? You know.
Well, we don't know. Yeah, you can just imagine. It was a fox. But yeah, I know, and the former USSR is a frightening part of the world in this respect. But look, what's really surprising is the EU, because the EU, it turns out, is a very it's a risk zone. For safety plants, well, there are a lot of nuclear plants there that are designated as high risk. You've got two in Bulgaria; they're both highly suspect. You've got the Temelin plant in the Czech Republic. The old reactor there was taken off the grid a couple of years ago. Before that, it had been the subject of a lot of controversy. The Germans and the Austrians were trying for years and years to get it shut down because they were saying it doesn't come up to spec. It's going to be the next big nuclear accident. Temelin was going to be the next Chernobyl for years and years, and they finally managed to get the Czechs to shut it down. But now the Czechs are saying, well, yeah, it's done, but we're going to build another plant there. And they've been toing and froing about this for quite a while now, and it tends to come and go with political changes. So in 2007 in the Czech Republic, the Green Party came to power as part of a coalition government, and they cancelled the plans. Then they were out of power. The plans were back on again. 2011 we had Fukushima, and the government in the Czech Republic basically came out and said, well, it's in Asia. Whatever happens in Asia stays in Asia, and so we're going to go ahead with our new plant. But the plans for this plant are almost as controversial as the old reactor there, and a lot of people are saying that is not a way to build a reactor in the middle of Europe. But I think actually even more surprising than that is are Belgium in the UK, especially Belgium. The Belgian plants are increasingly getting a reputation as unstable. And there's one in particular that's just frightening to think about. It's called Doel 3. It's located about 25 km from Antwerp, which I visited in summer, by the way. It's a beautiful city. One of my closest friends lives there, and so for me it's quite terrifying to contemplate this. But Doel 3 is well, it's almost as dodgy as any of the plants you could point to in the former USSR. In 2012, the Federal Agency for Nuclear Control in Belgium announced that there had been some ultrasound inspections of Doel 3, and they'd found thousands of cracks in the reactor vessel. Not just a crack or a few cracks, but thousands. And they said that there was no possibility of repairing them. The water that fed the reactor passed too close to where these cracks were, so they just couldn't be repaired. And they also said that the cracks weren't new. So it's quite possible that they dated back to the first year of the plant's operation, and the plant is 40 years old.
What were you worried about a few cracks in a nuclear power station for, Anthony?
I know. Well, I'm not so worried now because they closed the plant. They closed Doel 3 in 2012, and they also closed another plant called Tihange, which was made by the same manufacturer. And by the way, this manufacturer also has made several plants still operating in the USA. But a year after that, so midway through 2013, they reopened Doel 3, and they were promising it will be okay because we'll monitor it with this new battery of tests they'd invented, right? And these tests would show conclusively that the plant was running safely, but they didn't. And so they shut it down again. And meanwhile, they have another reactor, Doel 4. In August this year, the main turbine in the plant overheated because a valve had been left open. This valve controlled the passage of oil through the plant, so it was left open, and 65,000 litres of oil evacuated the plant and went under the ground into a storage tank. The result of that was the temperature control system went completely out of whack. The turbine that powers the plant couldn't run, and the whole plant just shut down. Nobody turned it off, it turned itself off. So, this was 2 months ago. And the Belgian authorities and the operator of the plant are both saying now that this was actually an act of sabotage. So there's a criminal investigation into the unexpected shutdown of this nuclear power plant. So now we've got Doel 3 and Doel 4 both out of operation because Belgium is so reliant on nuclear energy, the government is saying probably this winter there will be energy blackouts. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Belgium. It's cold in summer. I've
been to the centre square and tried their chocolates.
Ah, well, yes, you should. Everybody needs to. But yeah, it's a crazy cold country. They can't have blackouts there over winter. But just to add to all of that, the Tōhoku plant in Belgium, which I mentioned before, that was closed for a second time. They closed it, and then they decided to open it with this new, regime of tests. And then they closed it again because there was maintenance happening underneath the main reactor, and they found unexploded ordnance from World War II directly underneath a nuclear reactor. So Belgium's nuclear program is not looking so sound at the moment. It's looking very much as though it's run by idiots.
Well, it does look. If you just look at all the incidents worldwide, it does look like these are disasters waiting to happen. I mean, there was also the case of did you come across the Windscale fire of 1957 in the UK as well? Yes,
the Windscale fire was a very early example of how we are courting disaster wherever we build these things, and then more recently in the UK. The debate has moved on to the issue of the nuclear submarine fleet. Yeah, did you hear about the collision between a British nuclear sub and a French nuclear sub?
No, I heard about the nuclear sub in Sweden, or they were trying to hunt a Russian sub down, but no, I didn't hear about this one.
Yeah, 2009, a British and a French nuclear sub collided, and both of them were armed with nuclear missiles as well as having nuclear reactors powering them.
Oops.
Yeah, and the British government and French government immediately issued statements saying that the incident wasn't serious. But hello,
they tend to do that, don't they? If ever they say something's not serious, that's the time to start panicking.
Could it be more serious than two submarines with nuclear missiles aboard crashing into each other? I can't imagine anything much more serious, But yeah, so the last. I said before, there are certain areas of the world where these things are concentrated. The EU is one, the former USSR is another, and the last one is the USSA. The USA.
Freudian slip there.
Indeed,
it is turning into a bit like the USSR.
You mentioned 3 Mile Island before in Pennsylvania. There was a partial meltdown there. Radioactive material was released, and we still don't know how much. Another area of concern is the reactors in Michigan. There are two reactors, the Enrico Fermi reactors. They've been around forever. They're some of the oldest reactors in the world. Fermi 1 suffered a partial meltdown in 1966. Fermi 2, which actually, by the way, has the same make and model number as the reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi plant, it had to go offline in 2003 because there was a power outage. And in 2010, a tornado went through Michigan, and it actually passed directly through both of the reactor's cooling towers. And the authorities said, "Oh," and described it as a near miss. There was no major damage to the reactors, but if there had been, it would have been basically a full meltdown, and we would have had, Chernobyl Mark III.
It does seem that natural disasters don't mix very well with nuclear power stations.
They certainly don't.
Welcome back. We just had a quick break there, Anthony. So what else have you got to tell us about nuclear power?
Well, I know I've given you a lot of examples, and I've talked for a long time, but I think it's very important to understand just how many of these incidents there are, because it really underlines the truth of what is happening in the world and what you won't hear in the mainstream media, which is that these things are breaking down, having problems all the time. Yeah. So look, I mostly want people to understand three things. First of all, Fukushima and Chernobyl are not isolated incidents. They're just not. They're just the ones that have become famous.
And they're the ones that may be harder to cover up.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, There's just to go back to the US this year. There was an explosion at a nuclear facility called the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant in New Mexico, and the explosion melted through the primary containment facility of the plant there, and it spread radioactive materials across the state of New Mexico. Now, the initial reports on that were pretty serious, but actually they weren't serious enough, because they failed to include any data about the release of Pu-241 plutonium. And just last month, it was confirmed that more Pu-241 was released than any other radioactive material. So there's a feeling now amongst residents in New Mexico that the government is not telling people everything. And this is a theme that keeps resurfacing. As I said at the start, we often tend to say, oh, those guys, you know, the Japanese, they're so secretive. The Ukrainians, you know, they're part of the USSR, secrets. But it's happening everywhere.
Well, I think also in a lot of these countries, whereas, say, countries like Russia were always considered very secretive in the past, I think some of our countries are now taking over.
Yeah.
And it actually looks, you know, when you've got people like Snowden fleeing to Russia, you can see that it actually seems like our countries are becoming far more secretive.
Well, of course. I mean, politically, you know, Russia's not going to be upset about a person like Snowden because that suits their purposes. But I mean, there is secrecy wherever it happens. You know, the TEPCO electric power company, who was responsible for Fukushima. It took them 2 years to acknowledge the problem with radioactive water. You know, water that had been pumped through the plant, but had been then leaked from this storage tank that was on the site. Yeah. And even then, they said when they acknowledged this, they said yes, there are 300 tons of this radioactive water. But independent observers were saying no, it's much more than that, and it's not only coming from this tank, and it's now reaching the groundwater. You know, the actual water table of Japan, and still TEPCO were being very reluctant to really say anything until May this year, when they were essentially caught. They were dumping the water into the Pacific Ocean, and they were forced to admit it because they couldn't deny it any longer. Now, we don't know the consequences of that yet, but some people are saying that as time passes, we are going to reassess Fukushima, and it's going to be seen historically as a bigger disaster than Chernobyl. I mean, just to give you an example of how far-reaching the effects could be, this year there's been a spate of deaths in Utah among the population of bald eagles. Now, apparently they're just dying out in huge numbers. And some years ago, West Nile virus affected the bald eagle population, and that started killing significant numbers of them. But that has been brought under control. And when they started dying again this year, authorities thought, well, it's a new strain of the virus. But they ran all the tests, they got nothing. They've run a bunch of other scenarios through, and they've come up blank. But one theory, which has persisted for a while now, is that these birds in America are dying of radiation poisoning because they're preying on seabirds who fly over the Pacific Ocean. Now, that's speculation at this point. It's far from proven. But if it does turn out to be the case, that is frightening evidence of what just one nuclear accident can do.
Well, you know, as well as these nuclear accidents, I mean, we won't talk about it too much now, maybe another time, but... and I have mentioned it in the past, I just find it crazy that we know for a fact that nuclear bombs and nuclear detonations cause radioactive fallout that can cause cancer. And yet since 1945, there's been thousands of nuclear detonations under the nuclear weapons testing programs conducted globally around the world. And I think you've seen that video of the Japanese guy who put up a video on YouTube. And if anyone hasn't seen it, go onto YouTube, type in all the nuclear explosions since 1945, and you can see them popping up across the world, quite evenly covered actually. You know, and any conspiracist might say this could actually even be part of the eugenics program, deliberately contaminating the atmosphere so that people die. Because why on earth would you do this? Why would you release all this radioactive fallout into the atmosphere?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I second your recommendation. If you haven't seen that video, you really need to see it. It's an eye opener, no matter how jaded you are.
It certainly won't cheer you up. But
it won't. It won't. See it with vodka.
Yeah.
But right at the start, I said these major accidents were in fact less major than they could have been. And this is the second thing I hope that I can get across this evening. With Chernobyl, that's certainly true. It could have been a lot worse. In the days after the reactor exploded there were two things happening. First, there was the hugest cleanup effort of any kind in human history. I mean, this involved over 500,000 citizens of the USSR. And it's a whole story in itself. Somebody needs to write a book about it. There's been a documentary about it. It's fascinating.
Well, a lot of them died, didn't they?
They did, yeah. It's tragic because of that. I mean, the eventual death toll was huge, but it's also.
I bet they didn't mention that when they told them that to go and clear it up. Like, I bet they didn't say, "Oh, you're probably going to die." By the way.
Well, that is that's an interesting point. It's difficult to say because it seems that to fill in a few blanks here. So Ukraine was obviously one republic of the USSR. There were 15 republics altogether, and the authorities, conscripted, I suppose you could say, conscripted people from all of the 15 republics to come to Ukraine and try to contain the effects of the accident, and it involved over 500,000 citizens. So it's tragic because of the eventual death toll, but it's also inspiring because of the level of personal sacrifice that so many people were willing to make. People who knew that they maybe wouldn't come back.
I'm not so sure. I'm a bit skeptical about that. I wonder how many of them did know. I think there was probably a lack of proper educating these people as to how serious this was.
I'm not sure, because when you see the footage, what you see is people putting on all kinds of protective gear, and the protective gear was very, very much, made on the spot. It was like, here's a metal plate, we're going to strap it on you, now go up onto the roof. I think people knew that there was a risk. They perhaps might not have known the enormity of the risk. But at the same time that was all happening, there was a huge panic in Ukraine and Russia. And remember, Gorbachev was the premier at the time, and he was panicking. His aides were panicking because the scientists knew what I think we should all know about that power plant in Chernobyl, namely that it was priming itself for a much, much bigger second explosion. So that the first explosion, the one that we know about, the one that was, it sent clouds over Sweden and France and so on.
Belarus as well, I believe.
Belarus, where there have subsequently been a lot of birth defects and cancers and horrible after effects. That was the first explosion. The second explosion, had it happened, would have been potentially much bigger, because the scientists estimated that about 98% of the fissile material inside Chernobyl was still in the reactor. So it wasn't involved in the original explosion, but it was destabilized, and a lot of it leaked into underground chambers beneath the reactor. So nobody knew at that time what would happen. Nobody knew what it would do there. Would it just sit there, or would it be ignited? Would it become so unstable that it would explode? No one really knew, and even to this day, there's a team of scientists who they're old now. They're the same team of scientists that have been there since 1986. They're going down there doing daily readings to find out what's happening with that stuff.
And didn't they build a concrete sarcophagus over the top of it to try and protect it from that second explosion?
They did, and that was the project that I was talking about before. That was something that had to happen almost overnight. Somebody had to come up with a design for this. Nothing like this had been designed before. And then it sort of passed. Once the USSR collapsed and Ukraine became an independent country, it passed to the international community, and a more permanent fixture needed to be designed. The sarcophagus was only ever meant to be a temporary structure, and it sort of fell to the EU because although they tried to exclude the states on their periphery like Ukraine, Moldova, Transnistria, Bosnia, and so on, it still sort of fell to them, and every year they put it back 1 year and put it back a year further and so on. But a lot of if that explosion, the second explosion, had happened, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that really none of us would be able to go on holiday in Europe today, because really, as I said, 98% of the material in Chernobyl was still there after the initial explosion, and potentially ready to explode in a second, much larger wave.
Well, I don't know if this is still the case, but I thought that threat was still very much in existence, and there was a bit of dispute as to who should pay for actually sorting out this mess of a situation.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a big question. Who should pay for it? We don't know. I mean, Ukraine is obviously bankrupt. I mean, it was bankrupt before this year, but now, having prosecuted a war that's been going on for almost a year, how can they possibly look after this? It's a huge problem, and it could change from a kind of background issue to the absolute most urgent issue of the day.
Well, it could. I mean, with the economy clearly dropping, I mean, I can honestly say, being here at the moment in Ukraine, you can see there's a change in the economic situation. I notice it physically by noticing that, say, 30% of cash machines aren't working, and they're almost completely out of order.
Yep.
And prices are rising, and for me, obviously, the hryvnia is worth like double what it was before.
Yeah, I know, the currency's gone through the floor. Yeah. And so if something like this happens, if Chernobyl were to become unstable again, and if another explosion were to happen, who would deal with that? And I think there are too many people who don't understand this, unfortunately, that our worst nuclear accident in history so far could at any moment become 50 times worse and could end European history. Because of all of that material explodes, Europe is gone. So basically, you've had a couple of guests on this program talking about apocalyptic scenarios. I would like to say to you, this is the apocalypse. The apocalypse is the next nuclear accident. The apocalypse is the second Chernobyl. The apocalypse is something going more seriously wrong in a nuclear power plant than what we've seen so far. And what we've seen so far is small fry in comparison to what could happen.
And there's still natural disasters as well that can play a part. I mean, you mentioned Satsuma Sendai earlier, and there's also a place called Ichikikushikino, which is a bit slightly further away.
Yeah.
And apparently there's a volcano near there, Mount Ioyama, which has recently been shaking, and there's been some small tremors, and it's showing signs that it may erupt as well. And there's obviously it's not too far away from Satsuma Sendai, and all these volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, earthquakes, they're the things that could actually spark off one of these disasters as well.
Yeah, and you just wonder, like, what is wrong with people when there's more column inches? You know, there's been more column inches written in the last 5 years about the Kardashians than about this. It makes no sense.
I mean, that we could do a whole new show on that as well. How pathetic society is at the moment. I mean, I saw the other day. Have you ever seen Honey Boo Boo?
I've heard of it, but thankfully haven't seen it.
Please don't watch it. Yeah, unless you really want to torture yourself. But apparently that's coming to a close because one of the people involved in the program had some paedophile connections. But it should have been shut down a long time ago for many other reasons. It's just ridiculous. I mean, and some of the programs we've got on TV, and some of the things in the media, and the focus of things on the news. Like I've started tweeting some of the things on the BBC that get reported, which are completely trivial. Like there was an article on royalty the other day saying that Kate Middleton apparently had left the house for the first time in a while after feeling sick. She's left the house, and the article was all about how she said it's good to leave the house. And it's just constant ridiculous articles about the royal family in the UK on the BBC. Every single thing they say, that whole article was based around the fact that she said to someone, it's good to leave the house. Meanwhile, you have these potential nuclear disasters, these wars around the world, and far more serious issues. And it is a sign, and it's a problem in our society at the moment.
Well, let me say, I think it is good to leave the house.
It is good to leave the house, actually. You mentioned it, yeah. So maybe that's what they were trying to say to us.
Well, it could be. I mean, I just, because I'm old, right? I remember the 1980s. I remember the rallies that really put a brake on the American nuclear power program in the 1980s. They came after 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island really woke a lot of people up and got a lot of people into the streets, and that's a good thing. In Australia, where I grew up, we had the NDP, Nuclear Disarmament Party. They were a real force in politics in the 80s, and I think again that's a very good thing. Obviously you don't want a single issue party like that necessarily to run your country, but you need a presence. You need a presence saying we are not okay with this. Now, a couple of months ago, there was a report on the American program Last Week Tonight. Do you know this program with John Oliver?
I may do. I think I do.
Yeah. So John Oliver is a comedian, a British comedian on American TV, and he reported on a Senate hearing. The Senate hearing in America was about the issue of nuclear power. And it was an open hearing, anybody could come. And as it turned out, the number of people in the gallery were less than the number of officials involved in the hearing. Now, to me, that is a big social change, because I remember a time when there were people in the streets in their tens of thousands protesting against nuclear power. And we've kind of forgotten. And that's why I wanted to mention this tonight, because it's no less of an issue now than it's ever been, and we need to start taking it seriously and saying it's not okay.
Let us know what you think about the nuclear threats, be it from weapons, accidents or terrorism. Are we being alarmist, or do you agree? Go to our voicemail section, drop us a voicemail with questions, comments, ideas, suggestions. Remember, blind belief in authority is the greatest enemy of truth. Albert Einstein. Don't forget, please donate if you can. There's a donations button in the About section of our YouTube channel. Feel free to support us. People who donate £25 or more, it's gone down slightly. Yes, Christmas is just around the corner. Anyone who donates £25 or more gets a Truth Sentinel t-shirt. Send me an email before you donate, or afterwards if you trust me, and with your size, your address, and I'll send one to you. It has the Truth Sentinel logo on the front and the Einstein quote on the back. Good way to spark up a conversation if someone reads the message on your back and asks what it's about. Okay, so also we have a company, t-shirt company that we support, and you can buy t-shirts from them. They can even do customized t-shirts. I've put a few photographs of their t-shirts, but you can find them on their website as well, which is truthtshirts.com. They've got quite a wide range, and as a Truth Sentinel listener, you get 10% discount. Plus, we get £2.50 donation for every t-shirt sold. You just need to use the code TRUTH1 to get your 10% discount. when you buy off their website. That's Truth One. And I do think political T-shirts are a good way to show people around you that how you think, what your views are. And the more people around that are showing those kinds of disenchantment with our government, I think the more support people can get for actually doing something about it. So don't forget to come and say hi, get in contact on Facebook, Twitter, or email scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Topics coming up in future episodes could include missing persons, utopia, time travel, the Dyatlov Pass incident, religious cults, Scientology, parallel universes. We might revisit Anarchy and the nuclear issues as well. Parallel universes, the control of scientific fact, Noah's Ark and the flood, revolution, and we'll have some Truth Alliance discussions as well on world events. Other shows that we sometimes listen to are Alex Jones, Hagman, Freeman Fly, Mark Cockin, John Geary, David Icke, Pete Wicker, Sheila Zielinski. Obviously we support Seth Davis and his articles as well. UK Column, The Average Liberator, Lip TV, Buzzsaw. Sometimes watch The Trues with Russell Brand. I know a lot of people aren't happy with him. He does seem a bit hypocritical sometimes, but I'm still giving him a chance to listen to him. To be honest, I think everyone's got a part to play. You know, I'll give him a chance anyway. I'm sure he'll really appreciate that as well. Sponsors, advertisers, or anyone who'd like to finance the show, that would be great, because we're running a budget of 0, as I said. Please contact us. And if you want to advertise something, if it's some kind of ethical product that fits in with truth, then we might be interested. We're also always looking for interesting guests or researchers, so please get in touch. You'll find us on Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube just by typing in Truth Sentinel or Scott Sentinel 9. Email is scottsentinel9@gmail.com. Please leave a voicemail. Thanks again for listening. Catch you later. Goodbye.